Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well today. This time we're going to be doing a bit of an update to a previous video. These are my favorite RPGs that I have played so far. It's a mix of both indie games and retro RPGs, and yeah, I had to have played these for my channel or written about them on my blog. So let's get into it. First up, we have Cosmic Star Heroine. This is a short but fantastic RPG. It feels a little weird to say that an 8 to 10 hour game is short, but in context with all the other games that are on this list, it's a pretty short game. Cosmic Star Heroine felt like a game that could have been in the Phantasy Star series. It probably could have been Phantasy Star 5. It just wasn't. It really feels like it should be in that universe, though. The game starts with the main character, who is working for some government. They are investigating a group of rebels, and this is set in a dystopian society where the government is trying to control the population. That actually plays a pretty big part in all of this, where the government's trying to essentially put chips in everybody's heads so they can control them all. It's kind of creepy and kind of cool at the same time. And yeah, it feels like a plot that could have been in Phantasy Star. I'm sorry to keep hammering that, but it really feels that way. This is a fantastic game. I really enjoyed it. The combat system is a little odd, but it is a ton of fun. Now we have Ogre Battle March of the Black Queen. I would have put this much later in the list, but I wanted to get me just gushing about the game out of the way really quick. This is an awesome game. It's actually my favorite Super Nintendo game. The story isn't as good as, the Tactics Ogre side of the series, but it is still pretty fun. You have this evil empire that's taken over a continent. It's defeated, I think it's like 4 or 5 other kingdoms, and you play as a rebel commander who is trying to defeat them and push them all back and restore order to this whole continent. You can, depending on your actions in the game and the characters that you recruit, you can turn the kingdom back over to the rightful ruler, or you can try to rule it yourself. There are a lot of endings to this game, and yeah, it's pretty crazy. There is so much stuff in here that I have no idea how you were expected to have known about most of it during the course of this game. Like your first playthrough, you are not going to get everything. You're probably going to miss a lot. Even if you go through some of the walkthroughs that are online, you're probably going to miss something because a lot of the walkthroughs are not all that great. Or at least the ones that I saw were not that great. I love this game way more than I probably should. It is a bit of an auto-battler when you get into the combat, but that just made it feel more fun to me as you're moving your characters around, and this really is a wonderful strategy RPG. Sea of Stars was my game of the year last year. It was a very just wonderfully made game. I was super excited about it, and it definitely, met all of my expectations. Most modern RPGs tend to be like an action RPG, and they're not really something that I would enjoy because they tend to be like Soulsborne games, which is a genre that I just don't like at all. But the indie RPGs tend to be more turn-based, and that's what this one was, and it was awesome. It's a retro-inspired turn-based RPG with beautiful pixel art and an incredible story. You follow 2 kids who are destined to fight against evil. Like every RPG, they end up fighting some variation of God at the end. Or they're going up against God, and you have to defeat all of his minions. It's just a really cool story that I cannot do justice in a minute and a half. It's such a great game. You do have a bit of a timing system when it comes to the combat, but you can also turn that off, which I thought was probably better because I don't like dealing with that crap when I play these games. It's just a ton of fun to go through, and this really feels like a gateway into other indie RPGs out there, especially if you don't really pay too much attention to what goes on and Twitter and some other places. Now let's jump back to another one of my favorite RPGs. We have Phantasy Star 4. This is my favorite game on the Sega Genesis. I have a ton of memories of playing this one with my friends back in the 90s. This was a rental title that both my friend Eric and my friend Joey rented. We played the shit out of this game. It feels a little weird to say this was the first game in the series that I played, but I played the Phantasy Star series really, really out of order. 4 was always my favorite. I love the comic books cutscenes. I love the combat in this. I love the characters. The story was really great before I started analyzing it like an idiot when I got older. But yeah, this is such a wonderful game. I don't really have anything bad to say about it. The story does leave room for a sequel, which unfortunately we never really got, which is a real shame. I love how this game incorporates elements from the previous 3 games. Yes, even Phantasy Star 3 gets a callback here because they had to tie that thing into this whole series somehow. It is so cool to go through and play this, and I just loved everything about it. The graphics are awesome, the gameplay is awesome, the story is great, the characters are wonderful. It is just such a wonderful game to play. I think Thousand Arms would have been way more entertaining if I had done the dating simulation part of this game. I should really go back and do that again, just because I completely whiffed on it while I was playing this. It's fun that it's in there, but if you don't realize that it's there, that's the problem with it. You can just sort of forget about it, and you can go on and keep playing the actual storyline, and then forget about the whole idea of going and dating all these different women and trying to use them to help upgrade all of your weapons. That's something that I kind of regret when I was playing this. It is so much fun. It is an incredibly funny game. It has a wonderful story. It's just such a cool world that this game exists in. And then they throw in this dating simulation thing, which is incredibly important to the game because it's how you upgrade your weapons and magic. But it's not like front and center, and the game doesn't force you into doing it. You can completely skip it and beat the game without using it. It just gets a lot harder to do. So you play as a magical blacksmith who starts off as an apprentice after his kingdom gets destroyed, and you go around the world trying to gather the power that you need in order to defeat God, or a version of God, the evil God, the symbol of all that is evil. It's pretty standard JRPG stuff, but it is a lot of fun, and I really wish that this game was more accessible to people. So far in 2024, Unicorn Overlord has been my favorite game. It took everything that I loved from Ogre Battle, and it made it just a little bit better, with the exception of the combat. I think Ogre Battle's combat is a little bit better. It's still a auto battler, but I think you have more control over the combat in Ogre Battle than you do with Unicorn Overlord. Also, Unicorn Overlord gives you the option to just skip watching the battle entirely, which I don't really like all that much. The game's story is just a ton of fun, and it feels like an alternate telling of Ogre Battle. You play as the stereotypical hero, and you're trying to free the continent from an evil emperor who just happens to be under the control of some sort of a demonic being or an evil being that's been around for a very long time. It's not the devil like it was in Ogre Battle. It's just an evil wizard. So it's still there. It's still a standard JRPG story in some ways, but you're not fighting an evil god, you're just fighting an evil wizard who wants to bring back his own people. It's still pretty cool. I like it an awful lot. I didn't think we would ever get another game that's like Ogre Battle, where it's the strategy RPG that you're moving around units on a screen and fighting off a bunch of evil people. But hey, here we are, and I am so glad that Unicorn Overlord exists. And I really hope that we get another version of this, or another game in this series. Now we get one of my favorite games on the PS1, and it's also from the Ogre Battle Tactics Ogre family. These are two separate series that are very much conjoined into the Ogre Battle saga, and Tactics Ogre, I think, has a much better story. I like the gameplay more than Ogre Battle, just because I like these tactical RPGs where you're moving units around on like a chessboard, and you're just trying to figure out the strengths and weaknesses of everyone. This tells a much more personal story by focusing on a smaller island and the relationships between the three ethnic groups on that island. It's really cool. And depending on how you play it, there are either no heroes in this game, or you have some very flawed characters who are just trying to do the best they can. The game does have, several different endings to it. The overall conflict is very similar to the ethnic conflict in the Balkans, and that followed the breakup of Yugoslavia. And it's a very mature story compared to some of the other RPGs out there. This game is so good. I played the PS1 version. I didn't play Ogre Battle Reborn. If you want a more accessible version of the game, I would play Reborn, because it's a more watered down version of the PS1 version, and it's a lot easier to play, let me put it that way. Jade Cocoon came out at a pretty odd time. Its play mechanic is very similar to Pokemon's, where you're going around, you're collecting different monsters. In Jade Cocoon, you are merging those monsters together through like some divine prayer, and that is making them stronger, or it can change like their alignment to either earth, wind, water, fire, that sort of thing. It's a pretty fun game. However, it is lumped in with a lot of other Pokemon clones. I think fairly lumped in with a bunch of other Pokemon clones, even though I don't really see this as being one, just because, it came out at the same time, but it's still a very different game from Pokemon. In Jade Cocoon, you play as a Cocoon Master, and you're charged with saving a village. You have to venture into one of 4 forests, and you're trying to just unravel the mystery of what happened. And you're trying to find a cure for the disease that's kind of going through this place. You're dealing with a lot of just really stupid people in the village who seemingly don't want you to succeed, despite the fact that you're trying to save them. It's kind of comical in some ways. Yes, it does have a lot of similarities to Pokemon, but hey, I really love it. This was a rental title for me, and once I started collecting video games, I went out to try to find it, just because I really enjoyed the game a lot. And I loved just exploring the story and everything, because a lot of the lore in this game you need to go out and find. Vandal Hearts was a ton of fun to play. I vaguely remember playing it in the 1990s, but I could have gotten it confused with any other tactical RPG that I rented around that time. There is a grittiness and kind of a griminess to Vandal Hearts' art style that I just found really cool. And I think the story is pretty awesome as well. The game picks up after a revolution that overthrew the monarch. Now you have this corrupt civilian government that's running everything. And they're trying to rule, but everyone's just working against each other. You play it, your character is a former noble who is in like the town militia, I think, and you're kind of dealing with all of the political stuff that's going on. And then eventually they start sending you into time travel shenanigans, which I thought was bizarre, but still kind of cool and worked for this whole game. And you end up fighting against some guy who's just pissed off at the world and trying to kill everyone. I will say the final boss battle in this was pretty disappointing. I like the graphics and the gameplay. Those are awesome. The story is really cool. It reminded me a little bit of the French Revolution in some ways. And I just enjoyed it an awful lot. But that last boss battle in this, I was like, really? That I was expecting more from it. Final Fantasy VI is my favorite game from the mainline Final Fantasy series. I like it as much as 7, and this is one of the games that I played with my friend Drew. I've got a ton of memories of playing it with him. The story starts like many other RPGs. You're fighting against an evil empire, trying to take over the world. You end up fighting God at the end of it after the bad guy wins. That was a frickin' twist I didn't see coming when I first played this. You're going along, you're like, okay, yeah, I can beat this guy. And then he destroys the frickin' world and wins. And then you need to go around and deal with everybody's shattered emotional state and put your team back together and try to defeat God. That was fun. This really is a spectacular RPG. It's just a very long one that you need to deal with some weird stuff, but it is wonderful. I'm glad that I gave Phantasy Star 2 several chances, like a more serious try to get into it, because it was really great. I still like the fourth game more than this one, but Phantasy Star 2 is a lot of fun once you get into it. It has some weird things that you might have missed on your first playthrough of this game, or maybe you didn't give it as serious of a try like I didn't do the first few times, where you just go along and you're like, well, okay, I hit a roadblock, I don't know how to get past it, or I just got beat down by a bunch of enemies and I didn't grind for levels enough, or something like that. Anyway, the story follows a group of characters who are trying to defeat Dark Falls / Dark Force / evil AI that's taking over the world because people have kind of just decided that's the way the world needs to be run. We're just going to have it's a sci-fi story where computers basically take over the world. In this case, they take over a solar system because people have just kind of gotten lazy. It touches on a few other things, like human beings being an invasive species. Jesus Christ, that was fun. And computers deciding, hey, we need to wipe out humanity. And the computers are influenced by Dark Falls or Dark Force, depending on which game you're playing, because it changes its frickin' name every time. And then in the fourth game, you find out it's an aspect of the Great Darkness. It's really a fun series. Definitely give it a chance. Arcadian Atlas was kind of a late entry for this. I was really going back and forth with a bunch of different games, but the more I thought about it, the more I felt like it deserved to be on this list. It is a beautiful looking tactical RPG. The plot reminds me a little bit of Tactics Ogre and Vandal Hearts. It does have some flaws, but for an indie RPG, it's really great. The story starts out with a civil war between the queen and the oldest princess. The king has been poisoned and killed. You never find out who actually killed the king because that gets dropped. If you play through this, you're going to notice that a lot. Something important happens and then it gets dropped. But you go through this whole civil war and you're just struggling to find somebody to really care about. You have your two main heroes, and they're great. I really do love them. Their dynamic is awesome. They end up on opposite sides of the Civil War for a while and then come back near the end. And then you end up defeating, not God, but you end up defeating just this evil spirit that's taken over one of the princesses. It's pretty awesome. I would just tell you to stay through the entire credit sequence so that you get the real ending, because that's when things get really good for the story. There really isn't too much to say about Chrono Trigger that hasn't already been said. It's a really fun game with a great story. I have a lot of fantastic memories of playing this one, both with my friend Drew and then on my own. It was just so cool to go through and play this. This is a time-traveling adventure where you are trying to stop a mysterious creature from destroying the world. I don't know how many times I've said that. It's not God, though. You don't have to kill God in this. It's just a giant alien porcupine slug leech thing. So, yeah, that's fun and different. There are a bunch of endings and side quests for this game, so there's a lot to do in here that can alter how the game ends. It's pretty great. I remember playing this with my friend Drew. It was one of the first RPGs that I played for the Super Nintendo. Drew introduced me to a lot of RPGs over the years, so yeah, a lot of this was his fault. I was really more of a Genesis kid. That's why I played Phantasy Star 4 first and then came on to these later. But Chrono Trigger is awesome. It's been re-released thousands of times, it seems like, so you can play this on just about anything. And if you haven't given it a chance yet, I would definitely say try to play it, because it is a wonderful game. Parasite Eve reminds me of Christmas, not only because the game takes place during Christmas, but that was when I got this game. It was a Christmas present, so hey, whole lot of Christmas going on. It was just a fun game to play when I was a kid, just because I think I was the only one who actually had it out of my friends group. And yeah, I loved going back and revisiting it for when I played it, I think a couple of years ago. But yeah, it was so cool. This is one of those cases where it's not an action RPG, but it kind of is, and it works really well in this game. You play as Aya, and you're caught in just a bizarre set of circumstances where you are fighting a bunch of monsters, and you are fighting against something called Eve. Basically, your mitochondria that live in all of your cells have rebelled against you, and they're turning people into monsters as mitochondria decide that they're going to take over. It's super complicated, and I would honestly tell you to go find the movie Parasite Eve that's on YouTube, because that does a decent job of explaining things, and the movie's not all that bad, as long as you don't mind, reading subtitles the entire time. There's also a book, and the game acts as a sequel to the book. It's pretty awesome. I love this game a lot. It was just so much fun to go back and play. In my notes here, I wrote a joke about this is where George Lucas got the idea for mitochondria, which probably, that wouldn't surprise me at all if he did. But yeah, I think this game does a much better job of weaving that into its plot and making it at least fun. So let's wrap this up with kind of a modern Pokemon clone. This is Monster Sanctuary. This game is definitely a Pokemon clone, but it also kind of combines Tales of Destiny, or at least that whole gameplay style. You create a party of 6 monsters, but during the battles, it's 3-on-3. You give orders to each of your monsters, and you can also swap between the different monsters as you're playing. So it's pretty fun. It's also got just beautiful pixel art. I love the way the game looks. It's just awesome. It is set up a little bit like a Metroidvania, so you have to go around, solve puzzles. Some of those require you to have certain monsters or monsters with certain abilities so that you can, fly, break through walls, that sort of thing, or light something on fire. Who doesn't love that? But it's also got a cat with a bastard sword in it, so how can you possibly get mad at this game when it's got a cat that's holding a giant sword? It's adorable. There is a mystery with Monster Sanctuary that I like a lot. You learn a lot about the history of just where your characters are playing in. It's just such a fun game. I really love it. This list changed several times while I was going through it. I always felt like I was leaving something off. The 15 games here have just been moved around quite a bit while I was writing all of this stuff down. Even now, I'm feeling like I forgot something that deserves to be on here. I thought about expanding it to 20, but that just felt like it would be too much of a burden and a bit too unwieldy to try to remember everything. I like all of these games an awful lot. If I had to pick my favorites, it would be Ogre Battle, Tactics Ogre, and then Unicorn Overlord. Those are definitely my favorites out of all of these. There are a lot more RPGs that I want to play. Some of them I'm just having trouble getting into. And then there are ones that I'm told are classics, and when I play them, I'm like, yeah, I'm just not really feeling this. So at some point, there will be another version of this, and hopefully new and different games will be on here. Some games that I've been wanting to play are Suikoden, Breath of Fire 2, Breath of Fire 3, Pokemon Crystal, Lapuzzle Tactics, Dragon Quest 8 I want to get to eventually, then Tales of Phantasia, Shining Force 2, Kudelka, and just a whole bunch of others. Hopefully I'll get to those at some point. I'm just not entirely sure when, because things are always crazy and just going into flux and whatnot. So my schedule is just always messed up. Anyway, that's going to wrap things up. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will talk to you all later. Bye.